this is the third video in our middle childhood cognitive development section. Now we're going to talk about intelligence. Intelligence is different than achievement. Intelligence is something that's really hard to define, but we need to understand that there's a difference here. So achievement is that which is attained by one's efforts, and it's presumed to be made possible by one's abilities. So it's what a child has learned. It's their skills and their knowledge that's based on experience. So achievement tests measure what has been learned. Intelligence is much harder to define. It's usually perceived as an underlying competence and the ability to learn. So intelligence equals competence, achievement equals performance. So in Western cultures, intelligence is defined as the ability to learn and think logically. It's how well you can adapt to curveballs and answer trick questions, and mental speed is important in intelligence too. But different cultures define intelligence differently. So we tend to use IQ to measure intelligence. This is called the intelligence quotient, and it started with the ideas of general intelligence, which are broad intellectual abilities, how well a child sees things and how they relate to each other, and specific intelligence, which are abilities in particular areas such as reading, verbal skills, spatial skills, etc. So the IQ, the intelligence quotient, is your mental age divided by your chronological age, and then they multiply that by 100. This is why 100 is average. When your mental age equals your chronological age, you divide those, you get a 1, you multiply it by 100, you get 100. So there's a lot of arguments about what skills should be included in the testing of IQ, and it varied widely depending on who was testing it. But two broad factors emerged as important in intelligence, and those were fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. So fluid intelligence is your ability to think. It's your ability to solve problems, to come up with solutions to issues. Your crystallized intelligence are just the knowledge and skills that you have acquired through your life. So I have a graph here that kind of shows it. So fluid intelligence is your capacity to reason, to learn new things, to think abstractly and solve problems. Your crystallized intelligence is your prior learning and past experiences. It's based on facts. It increases with age as you learn more. Okay, so intelligence is made up of both of these things. So I have a quest for you here. I will post that on Blackboard. There are many criticisms about intelligence testing, the main one being that most tests are culturally biased. Tell me what that means with examples. What are some testers doing to address it, and are those efforts effective? And I will post this on Blackboard for you. Sternberg came up with a theory of intelligence. It's called his triarchic theory. He developed this in 2015. It's based on the IP perspective, which is a pretty new perspective. And in this theory, intelligence is three-pronged, hence the word triarchic. So first is the analytical intelligence. This is your academic ability, your ability to solve problems, compare and contrast, engage in critical thinking, and this is driven by the components of thought. So this is the intelligence that depends on mental processes such as planning, reading, remembering. It's your ability to process information. The second type of intelligence is creative intelligence. This is your creativity, your insight, how well you can cope with novel situations, the ability to invent, discover, theorize. This is important for people like scientists too. It's not just artists. It's coming up with new solutions. And this is driven by experience. With experience, a child masters more complete mental processes and learns to apply rational and intuitive thinking to novel and familiar tasks. So this type of intelligence shows when people are figuring things out and solving problems. And we get better at that with experience. And then practical intelligence. You can think of this as your street smarts. You can adapt to the demands of your environment or situation. You can apply knowledge in practical solutions. So it's not just the ability to come up with a lot of solutions, but to be able to choose one that will actually work. This includes social intelligence, the ability to read other people and understand social cues. This is driven by context. So the child's ability to show adaptive behavior in real life situations, to solve problems within the context that they occur, not just hypothetically. Okay, so this is one theory of intelligence. There's another one called Gardner's multiple intelligences. Okay, and my slides are a little off here, sorry about that. So we'll just pull them all up here. Okay, so He created a framework with 8 different intelligences. He cited cultural and economic factors such as limited opportunities to obtain quality schooling. So some people just can't improve their intelligence as much as others. But his levels of intelligence, the first is linguistic, which is how good you are at language, understanding the meaning of words, how to put them together, how to communicate. The second is logical mathematical. This is, as it sounds, the ability to do math, to solve logical problems. Okay, third is spatial, understanding how things work in a three-dimensional space, to be able to mentally rotate objects. Even things like catching a ball that's being thrown at you involves spatial intelligence. Musical intelligence, understanding tone, rhythm, how music works, being able to remember music very easily. Bodily kinesthetic is understanding your body's position in space. So dancers, athletes, they all need a high bodily kinesthetic intelligence. Interpersonal is the ability to read other people, to communicate with other people, understand what they're saying and thinking and their nonverbal cues. This is interpersonal intelligence. Intrapersonal intelligence is the ability to reflect on oneself and see your own strengths and weaknesses, how you learn, how you think. So it's very introspective. People with high intrapersonal intelligence are really good at recognizing their own thoughts and feelings. Naturalistic intelligence is knowledge of the natural world, so like biology, geology. You understand a lot about nature. Later, Gardner added existential, a 9th level of intelligence, and this is kind of thinking about the big picture. It's like philosophy, thinking about the meaning of life, thinking about the big questions. So the first 3 intelligences here are the only ones tested on most IQ tests, on most measures of intelligence. But Gardner argued that those 3 are the only types, and they're not the only ones that are important, that all of these intelligences are equally important and should be recognized. And each type is regulated by different parts of the brain. So each intelligence is kind of located in a different part of the brain. So extreme examples of this are savants. They have extremely high intelligence in one area, but are also often deficient in another. So it's advocated for schools to foster all of these intelligences and recognize them and value them all, not just the first 3. And unfortunately, that's what most schools do, is just focus on the first 3. So the gifted child. What is the definition of gifted? This used to be based solely on IQ or scholastic abilities, but now it includes giftedness in areas such as music, art, creative writing, dance. This kind of goes with Gardner's intelligences. You can be gifted in different areas. So the thinking of a gifted child seems to grow in the same sequence as a non-gifted child, but it goes faster. So they just learn things faster. Gifted children share certain characteristics with each other. They tend to have a love of the subject that they're gifted in and an intense desire to master it from an early age. They're kind of self-driven. They love the subject and they want to learn about it. They all get instruction from people who inspire and nurture the child's talent. They can't be gifted if there wasn't someone to nurture that talent and encourage them to develop it. And they all have parents who are committed to promoting their talent. They have parents who are supportive and are helping them develop that talent and that skill. So creativity versus intelligence. In psychology, creativity and intelligence are not the same thing. And I have an example here. The example is from a famous study. The question is, what can you do with a paperclip? So Sir Ken Robinson conducted this study, and the basic question he asked was, what can you do with a paperclip? It turns out that most people can think of only about 10 to 15 ideas. You can clip letters together, use one to reset a smoke detector, and that's about it. They can't come up with a lot of solutions. Kids do a better job at this than adults, and over time the survey found that the education system can actually limit creative thinking at times such that older kids and adults are not nearly as good as coming up with uses for the paperclip. Okay, so somehow it seems like our educational system gets rid of creativity. However, the true divergent thinkers, so the ones who are good at thinking about thinking, the metacognition, can come up with over 200 uses for a paperclip. That's quite a long list. So maybe they use one to open a SIM card slot or create an electrical current if you build a circuit board. So divergent thinkers are able to come up with a lot of ideas that involve like hundreds of paper clips, since the question never mentions how many you use. And women might come up with radically different lists than men's. Engineers might get really techie. Who knows? There's a lot of different things you can do. So this is a way to kind of measure creative thinking. So what this comes up with are two ideas of thinking. There's convergent thinking, where this is what intelligence is associated with. Convergent thinking, which is arriving at a standard correct answer, coming from a lot of different places and all coming to the same answer that is deemed to be correct. That's convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is about creativity. It's going outside the box, going outside the norms, and finding an answer using a novel and unusual line of thought. So gifted children tend to be more divergent thinkers. They can think outside the box a little bit more. Intelligence and creativity are only moderately correlated, however, so just because you're intelligent doesn't mean you're more creative, and just because you're more creative doesn't mean you're more intelligent. So we talked about intelligence, but qualities of creative children tend to be they take chances, they refuse to accept limitations, they try to do the impossible, they don't just accept it when someone says you can't do that. They tend to appreciate art and music. They use materials around them to make unique things. They challenge social norms. They're often independent and nonconformist. They'll take unpopular stands. This doesn't mean they're oppositional. They're not just trying to fight. Rather, they're expressing genuine ideas and feelings, whether or not they're popular, whether or not they're the norm. And they tend to examine ideas that other people just accept. Some things people just accept at face value. These creative people can look at those things and challenge them and find flaws. So a highly creative person may present ideas that upset or shock the sensibilities of their place and time. And we're not just talking about artists and sculptors. Some historical examples might be like Galileo, Copernicus, Darwin. They all presented theories that shocked their culture, that were so against what people thought. In art, we might have like Cezanne and Van Gogh, people who just came up with new ideas and challenged the typical way of doing things. We will finish this topic in the next lecture.